xe máy, xe đạp điện, máy mía, đồ đồng, đồ điện cũ bán đi.
Right, I've been putting this off for way too long. It's time to finally make this review of the Feidian 4 Challenger. So as I say, these are the Feidian 4 Challenger. They are the entry-level super trainer / racing shoe from Li-Ning's top-tier Feidian lineup, coming in significantly cheaper than both the Feidian Elite and the Feidian Ultra. I'm going to do something different with this one and just give you a quick TLDR right at the top of the video to say that I have really enjoyed running in these shoes and would recommend them to just about everyone. To find out exactly what it is I like about them, how I've been using them, how I would recommend you maybe use them, and who it is I wouldn't recommend them to, stick around and watch the rest of the video. Or just jump to whichever bit you want to, based on the chapters that I am sure I will put down below. I'm going to go into a little bit of a ramble about what exactly is in these shoes, or more specifically, what is in the midsole. You see, unlike some other Chinese brands like Chaodan and Bimai, whose shoes I've run in before, Li-Ning do not give you any details up front as to what they use in their shoes, or really any of the stats about their shoes at all. All that Li-Ning say is that these shoes use a midsole compound called bung, which is fantastic because you can hop on Google and ask the internet what bung is and it will come back telling you that it's PIBA. And this is not always true. So here's the deal. Bung is kind of like a catch-all trademark name for Li-Ning for all of their performance foams. That means that their highest end PIBA foam is indeed referred to as bung, but there are also other foams in other shoes that carry that name whilst clearly not being the same material. Now I found it kind of tricky to find any information on this in the English language webosphere, but searching in Chinese I found a fair few articles that talk about this, and most of them mention what they call gaoduan bung, or high-end bung, diduan bung, or low-end bung, and a few of them mention something they call zhongduan bung, or middle-end bung, which feels like it makes more sense in Chinese. High-end bung is PIBA. Low-end bung, as far as I can tell, is some sort of TPEE foam, which I think might be the bung that is in my Dilu trail shoes upstairs. And the few articles I found that mention Zhongduan bung generally state that it is an eTPU foam. Again, searching using English, I found articles that refer to the bung in the Challenger 4 as PIBA, and I've also found some that refer to it as eTPU. And so I don't really know what this foam is. I originally thought they were eTPU, but then I ordered the Changfeng 3 Pro from Chaodan, and that is a shoe, in fact I'll get it out right now, and this is a shoe that in the advertising Chaodan states explicitly is PIBA. And well, to the touch, they really don't feel that different. So yeah, I can't tell you conclusively what this is. However, the main reason you would generally want to know what sort of material is in the midsole of a shoe is in order to know how it would perform. And I can tell you kind of what it feels like. If this is TPU, it is the lightest, most responsive, poppiest feeling eTPU that I have ever run in. And if it is PIBA, then it feels like a very, very subdued formulation of PIBA. So I hope that helps you kind of figure out the performance or general feeling of these shoes, and I'm sorry that I can't give you a more conclusive answer. So now that all of that waffle's out of the way, we can get on to the rest of the review. So far, I have racked up around about 300 kilometers in this pair of shoes. Most of that has been around about threshold pace, with some longer, steady runs, a little bit of slower sort of daily mile stuff, and even a workout where there was a mix of threshold topped off with some 200 meter repeats at around about 3k pace. So at least for me, I've taken it through pretty much every pace that I would usually run. So So going into the stats, these weigh 240 grams in an EU 45, which I believe makes them around about 10 grams heavier than the RC Elite 2 from New Balance, a little bit heavier again than the Vaporfly Next Percent 2, and a couple of grams heavier yet than the Xiaodan Feiying PB4. Now, I didn't record the exact weight of my original pair of Endorphin Speeds, which is a pair of shoes that I will be comparing these to quite a lot throughout this review. But I am 99% certain that these are lighter. As for the stack height, again, Li-Ning really don't like to give you any information about their shoes, so I haven't been able to find a stack height for this. But based on sort of feeling and look and what I've been able to search for on the internet, I think these are again sort of a moderate mid-30s, possibly low 30 millimeter stack height in the heel. They very much don't feel like a max stack racer, and so potentially one of the reasons they are lighter than the Endorphin Speed, or at least I think they are, is because the stack height is a little bit lower. Lastly, I don't know what the drop is. I really don't care what the drop is in any pair of shoes that I own. I don't feel like it makes a big difference to me. Most of the rocker focused shoes that I've bought or seen advertised tend to have a sort of moderate to lower drop, so I mean, a pure guess is that it probably falls in line with those. But like I say, I don't know, and I have no subjective gauge for these things. With regards to the upper, it is a very light, very breathable mesh with some pretty hefty holes in it. Certainly I don't see anybody having any overheating issues in this. There is a little bit of padding around the heels. I would say just enough padding. Honestly, this is exactly the sort of upper I like. I find anything more than this is just superfluous. And so this is light, it hugs the foot really well. You get a really good lockdown in the midfoot, in the heel. I don't think the toe box is particularly spacious. I wouldn't say it's particularly cramped. It is definitely a racing upper because there is not a lot of structure. And as I say, it uses this very light, very breathable mesh material with some pretty big holes. The tongue, again, is very thin. I find it sits on the foot really well. It's sort of gusseted, although it's not gusseted the whole way down. It's just at this end. There's a couple of straps that attach it to the, I guess, the midsole or the bottom of the insole. But I've certainly had no issues with slipping. I've had no issues with the tongue. I've had no issues with the upper. I find it has really good fit. If I have to compare it with the Endorphin Speed, I'm going to say I prefer the upper on the Endorphin Speed, but I should add in the caveat that the upper on the Endorphin Speed is my favorite upper ever, and I don't think any other upper comes close. So while this would lose out in a head-to-head, it's probably still like my third or fourth favorite upper on any pair of shoes I've owned. It just fits really well. It gives a really good lockdown. It really does lock my foot over the top of this midsole. I don't feel like there's any sort of squirming about or noticeable instability. I'll get onto instability later. And yeah, it does everything I need it to do without any excess weight. So next is the outsole. Again, I think the outsole is this sort of plasticky material that Chinese companies like to put on the outsoles of their shoe. I have run 300 kilometers in these, and while there is a little bit of wear down the, I can't remember if the outside is lateral or medial. I should really check this anyway. There's a little bit of wear along the outside of the heel here, like no noticeable wear in the forefoot. After 300 kilometers, yeah, this is gonna outlast the midsole, and that's all I really care about. It's grippy, I've taken out in the wet, absolutely no issues with grip, which at least in that factor, this is gonna come out on top of the Endorphin Speed, because while the grip wasn't terrible in that, it was a little bit slippy in wet conditions on the wrong surfaces. And unlike some of the sort of the plasticky, I guess they call it CPU materials that Chinese shoes often use on the midsoles, I don't really notice this when I'm out running. It's kind of hard to describe, but with some of them you do very much feel the fact that the midsole exists in a way that you don't really generally feel with rubber. So yeah, I don't notice the outsole. It is very grippy, it is very durable. That's all I care about. Okay, so time for the important bit, I guess, which is the midsole. And obviously, I've already talked about the compound here. I was also sort of mentioned that it feels like a fairly mild PIBA or a fairly exciting high-end ETPU. To keep the comparisons going with the Saucony Endorphin Speed, it's got a, not really pronounced, but a noticeable rocker on it. which is very similar to the speed. There's also a similar sort of ride and feeling underfoot, which is a soft landing that seems to very quickly firm up and then pop you back. It's the sort of feeling that I generally do get with Peeba shoes. A very soft landing, but then suddenly a very resilient feeling, and then it just sort of pops you up. It was the feeling that I got in the speed, and sort of the feeling that I got in the Vaporfly, and to some extent it was the feeling that I got in the Be My Carbon 42K, although that is a lot firmer. But it is more subdued. It's not quite as noticeable, it's not quite as poppy, it doesn't quite feel like it's pushing you forward and wanting you to go fast in the same way as those, at least the first two, other shoes. So on the run, it feels cushioned, feels a little springy, a little bouncy, but nothing crazy. All in all, if I had to describe the ride, I think I would go with smooth. I have found that when I'm running in this shoe, kind of no matter the pace, I do feel like I'm just rolling along, and it's very natural and very smooth, and everything feels like it's flowing. Again, kind of like the feeling I used to get in the original Endorphin Speed. And like the Speed, and I think this will be the last comparison I make, and this gets back to the thing I said at the beginning of the video about who I wouldn't recommend it to, it does feel a little bit unstable. Now, I said the upper locks me over the midfoot and I don't feel any stability issues, and I guess I'm kind of talking about almost two different kinds of stability. I never feel like my foot is wobbling about. I never feel like I'm about to tip over. But at the end of my first few runs in this shoe, I did feel like the stabilizer muscles on the side of my legs were aching more than they usually do in most of the shoes that I run in. This is a feeling that I very much got with the Endorphin Speed early on, and I think it went away as my legs strengthened up, although I can't be certain. All I know is that it did sort of go away over time. I had the same thing with this. I've had the same thing a little bit with the New Balance Rebel V2, I think is the shoe I have, which again is a very soft and sort of laterally unstable kind of a midsole, and again with an upper that doesn't have a lot of structure to it. So while I never feel like tipping over, I do feel like my legs are having to do a lot of work to keep that stability. And this is for me as someone who has a fairly neutral foot strike or landing. Like, I tend towards the heel and I tend to slightly, I guess you could say underpronate, slightly supinate. Like, my ankle doesn't roll in to be completely flat for toe off. But yeah, I don't have stability issues and I feel like my legs are working harder. So if you do suffer some stability issues, if you do tend to have sort of more exaggerated or extreme pronation and sort of rolling in towards the inside of your ankle, while I'm certainly not an authoritative voice on this, I can imagine that this shoe might feel pretty unstable to you, might pose a higher risk of you rolling an ankle. So in terms of use cases, I said at the beginning, I've used this for pretty much everything. For me, this is very much a threshold shoe. And now that's not to say it can't go faster. As I said, I took it up to do some 200-meter repeats at around about 3K pace, and I was surprised by just how natural that felt, just how easily my stride was flowing through that. Honestly, I think the shoes are fine if you want to do out-and-out speed work in them. But for me, that sort of softness and comfort, the way the upper provides that really nice fit, they just feel like shoes that I want to cruise in. They don't feel as aggressive as something like the Li-Ning Feidian PB, where they almost feel like they're tipping you forwards. They just feel like a shoe that can handle whatever pace you give to them, and they just feel very natural and smooth. And for me, I like that for my threshold shoes. I like that for cruising, maybe a slightly faster cruise, but cruising. The other area I think where they would sort of excel, and again, this is kind of where I used the Endorphin Speed, mainly for threshold, could use them for speed if I wanted, but also for long runs where I'm gonna add in a bit of tempo work, maybe towards the end. For me, that's usually in the form of, I do a long run and do a bunch of like X times 1 kilometer at marathon tempo, and I think these would be really good for that sort of a run as well. They do feel perfectly fine at slower speeds. Again, I think because of that sort of instability and the lack of structure in the upper, maybe they don't feel 100% natural cruising at sort of daily training sort of speeds, like zone 2, zone 1. But I do think these really are, if you want them to be, do-it-all trainers that could handle pretty much anything you throw at them. So the comparisons that I want to make, I've made again to the speed. I would like to emphasize before this video ends that I think these feel like the speed in more or less every way, but slightly less so. Like I say, the sort of pop and propulsion feels subdued compared to the speed. The upper doesn't fit quite as sock-like and comfortably as it did for me in the speed. The stack height isn't quite as high. It's kind of like if the speed was at 10, these shoes are dialed back to 8, and then like half the price. The other comparison I'm going to make is to the Xiaodan Feiying PB4, because that is the other shoe that I'm spending most of my time doing faster running in. Also the other sort of big Chinese brand racing shoe that I've got in my rotation at the moment. You can pick them up right now for very similar prices, at least on Chinese sites, and in a lot of ways they feel kind of comparable. So the Feiying is lighter, the foam feels slightly bouncier and more responsive. Though as I say, everything I've thrown at these shoes, they have given back to me. I haven't found a pace where they don't respond well yet. The Xiaodan also feels more aggressive when you're in it. It sort of feels like it wants to push you forward. And I think for racing and for speed work and sort of even interval stuff, although I don't do a lot of longer intervals, I will be sticking to the Feiying, and I will be using this going forwards very much as my threshold shoe. I think they can both do exactly the same things. I think if you wanted this to be a speed shoe, it'd be great. I think if you want the Feiying to be a threshold shoe and a long run shoe, I think it works great. In fact, I know it works great for those things. But it's just a general feeling I get when I'm in the shoes that this is more for cruising, that's more for going hard. Again, kind of to hammer home the comparison, I kind of feel like the Feiying feels like a Vaporfly light almost, and this feels like an Endorphin Speed light. I guess with the carbon plate it might make more sense to compare it to the Endorphin Pro, but I've never run in that shoe, though I imagine it feels fairly similar to the Speed. So yeah, in conclusion, I hate to keep repeating myself and keep mentioning other shoes, but I feel like this is very much the Endorphin Speed light. It feels very similar, at least to me, in pretty much every way, slightly toned down. It's not quite as bombastic, if that's the right word to use, which it probably isn't. But again, as I think I have neglected to mention so far, at least where I am, this is significantly cheaper. So I think I forgot to mention at the beginning, but I picked these up, well, I didn't pick them up for anything, my wife picked them up as a birthday present for me, so I don't officially know how much they cost. But if I look on the internet, I can find these for around about 400 renminbi. They were widely available for 409 renminbi at the time that she bought them for me. I didn't check up to see how much she'd spent. I know because I'd been keeping an eye on them for a while. For reference, like older versions of the Endorphin Speed when they're on sale are usually going here for 800 and something. So again, we're talking about half the price for, I would say, about 90, maybe 80% of the performance. And so even if they're not quite as good, if you can pick them up for anywhere near the price they should cost, I really don't see how you could be disappointed in these shoes. To me, they feel great, they feel comfortable, they feel fast, they feel like you can cruise along for a long time. The outsole is very durable, the upper is very comfortable. I haven't noticed any drop off in the midsole, and they have been an absolutely excellent addition to my lineup. I easily feel comfortable giving these an A grade, and unless you have stability issues, if you can pick these up, I genuinely do not see how you can regret it. Anyway, I completely ignored the script that I wrote for this one. I've just been rambling off the top of my head, so I probably missed out an awful lot of things that I wanted to mention. Probably repeated a few things. I am so far away from perfecting these reviews. But even so, if you were thinking about getting these shoes, I hope you found this useful. If you've got them, please do leave me a comment below saying what your impressions of them are. Do you like them as much as I do? Do you hate them? Have they not worked for you? Have they been brilliant for you? Would you recommend them? Anything that might help somebody else who ends up watching this video because they're thinking of getting these shoes. And yeah, if you enjoyed this review at all, please feel free to drop a like or a comment or a subscribe or whatever. As always, I hope I have been at least mildly helpful and mildly interesting. And I hope to see you next time out. Goodbye.